Now, I'm going to begin this homily with an example that's not very good, but it's really what we take from it. So I'm going to go back to the Winter Olympics. I'd like to go back to the gold medal game between Canada and the U.S. in men's hockey. Now, I started watching the game at 6 in the morning. It had actually started at 5 in the morning, but just couldn't quite get up. And when I was watching the game and what I saw of the game, I mean, Canada was clearly dominating the U.S. I mean, they truly deserved the gold medal just from their effort. But, and I missed the overtime goal when the U.S. won the gold medal. But I came down and I watched the different reactions of the players. Obviously, the American players were quite happy, quite exuberant. Then the Canadian players were like, they were in a tough situation. And as I looked at these guys, I'm like, you guys need to cry. And so I even got caught up in that. And a few hours later, I started to cry for them. How important it is we cry, how important it is that we grieve. Now, in the raising of Lazarus, sometimes we can over-focus on the divinity of Jesus, about him raising Lazarus to new life. But look at the humanity of Jesus. Look at the humanity of both Martha and Mary. Now, Martha and Mary believe their brother will rise. They believe in resurrection. They also, Martha gives a really good proclamation of who Jesus is. But they both let Jesus have it. There's emotions here. If you would have been here, our brother wouldn't have died, or my brother wouldn't have died. And wow, that's like, is that not like a stab in the heart? And so Jesus, after he has this experience with Mary and some Jewish people who are clearly grieving, he weeps. Jesus wept. Now, this isn't just a tear coming down the side of his cheek. He's bawling his head off. Now, this is very interesting because, he's going to raise Lazarus to new life. So why is he crying? Well, the first reason is because the emotion around him. It's very normal that if we're around a lot of people who are crying, that we may even start crying, even though we may not even know the person. But the other thing is that Jesus is being aware of his own death, and he needs to cry because he's under great stress for his own death, and so he just needs to let it out. He needs to bawl his head off. But even for us who believe in resurrection, we need to grieve when a loved one passes away, because that was a relationship that is no longer in the same way. I mean, of course, we can ask for the person's intercession, we can pray for the person, and yet there's a void in our life. We miss that relationship. We need to grieve that. We need to heal from that, even when we believe in resurrection, even when we know that one day we will meet our loved one again. Now, in the first reading for the book of the prophet Ezekiel, these people, I should call them people, are in a really rough situation. They witnessed their homes being destroyed, their temple being destroyed. Remember, the temple was like the presence of God. If the temple's destroyed, the presence of God has abandoned us. And now they're all of a sudden in this very violent nation that's very uncomfortable. They're full of all kinds of fear. And it's hard for them to even believe that there's any hope, that there's any new life, and yet this is the promise of the prophet Ezekiel. But like a lot of times, new life will come gradually. When we're grieving a loved one, our healing comes very gradually. And, we could even years later begin to cry again or even bawl our heads off, and that's okay. I mean, that's why God created onions, because it's just good for us to cry, not to hold our emotions in. Now, I just want to say one thing about the second reading, because we can mess this one up, is when there's a reference to flesh. This is not a reference to a body. And so, it's not saying the flesh is the body, which is bad, the spirit is good. Let that go. We as Christian people should have the greatest dignity for the human body. God has created us very good, and we have to hold on to that. Even though we're sinners, the foundation of who we are is very good, and God's goodness is always with us. So what does it mean by flesh? It means the sin of addiction. Likely each of us has a certain sin that we confess over and over again. We feel like we're just a stuck record. But yet, we can't lose sight that the Spirit resurrects us to new life. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead dwells within us to let us begin again. And so as we gather around the table, Lord, likely we're not going to bawl our heads off as we receive the body and blood of Christ, but it ought to move us to awe and wonder. It ought to move us to great enthusiasm at this great gift that God offers us, and to be grateful, to allow this to heal us, and so that we can be instruments of healing and peace for our world.